Russia maintains a high tempo on the battlefield, but its attempts are increasingly shattering against Ukraine. From September 2025 to May 8, 2026, according to estimates of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the Russian Federation lost approximately 257,000 personnel. The highest full month was December 2025, approximately 35.1K, followed by April 2026, approximately 32.6K. A turning point is visible regarding territory. In September-December 2025, the RF had about plus 1,748 square kilometers of net growth in the provided 4-week proxies. In January-April 2026, it was only about plus 306 square kilometers, with March and April already being negative for the RF. This means that the price of 1 square kilometer for the RF has risen sharply, and the frontline dynamics have become less favorable for Russian forces. The key event of the fall was Pokrovsk and Dobropilya. In September, Russian troops entered Pokrovsk, but the breakthrough toward Dobropilya was not developed, and Ukraine subsequently recaptured about 70 square kilometers of territory seized by the RF. In November-December, the Oleksandrivka-Hulyaypoli and Sivers directions became more important. CSIS also recorded an intensification of the Russian offensive on Hulyaypoli starting in November 2025. In February-April 2026, a trend shift is recorded. Russia Matters/ISW show plus 50 square miles in January, but already minus 57 square miles in February, minus 12 square miles in March, and minus 26 square miles in April. Also in February, Russia Matters separately noted a discrepancy. ISW estimated February 17th to 24th as minus 33 square miles for the RF, while DeepState estimated it as plus 5 square miles for the RF. In the 4-week window of February 24th to March 24th, 2026, the RF already had minus 4 square miles of net territorial change instead of plus 50 square miles in the previous window. In the window of March 31st to April 28, 2026, the RF lost another minus 26 square miles, and from April 7th to May 5th, it was already minus 46 square miles. In other words, the trend is February still plus, March almost zero, minus. A separate ISW analysis for the calendar month of April 2026 gave an even stronger signal. The RF lost control over 116 square kilometers in April 2026, which was the first such monthly net loss of controlled territory since Ukraine's Kursk operation in August 2024. ISW also noted that the Russian pace of advancement has been falling since November 2025. For comparison, the spring of 2025 does not look the same. In 2025, the RF also suffered very heavy losses, but territorially it continued to advance, with the pace increasing from March to May. Thus, in 2025, it was expensive but effective for the RF. In 2026, from March to April, we see a different picture. Expensive, but already almost without territorial results or with net losses of territory. In 2025, the RF could still convert heavy losses into territory. In 2026, this conversion broke down. For May 2025, Russia Matters, citing ISW, wrote that a Russian mill blogger visited a training center of the Moscow military district and reported that contract soldiers underwent only 1 week of basic training, followed by another 2 weeks in training centers in the occupied territory of Ukraine. Thus, the basic hypothesis is low training quality is not a new problem of 2025. It was systemic as early as 2025. In the first quarter of 2026, Russian recruitment, according to Yanis Kluge's estimate, fell to approximately 800 people a day, despite increased bonuses. This is noticeably lower than the 2025 rate. Ukrainska Pravda summarized that the RF's General Staff Plan for 2026 was 409,000 contract soldiers, but the reality of the first quarter was about 800 people a day, compared to 1,000 to 1,200 people a day a year earlier. Administrative pressure is also mentioned, including offers to contract students as an alternative to expulsion. This directly affects training. If there are fewer recruits than needed to replace losses and form reserves, the command has 3 options: train people longer and temporarily under-equip the front, throw people in quickly, or expand recruitment at the expense of lower quality, debtors, migrants, foreigners, students, people with no motivation. In March 2026, ISW, analyzing criticism from a Russian mill blogger, formulated a key dilemma. To truly improve combat capability, the Russian command would have to withdraw active forces from the front for additional training, and longer initial courses for recruits would delay their deployment to the front line. But Putin demands constant pressure along the entire front, which is incompatible with a quality pause for training. This is one of the most important conclusions. The RF understands the problem, but has no politically acceptable way to solve it without the front sagging. On March 25, 2026, ISW relayed a report from a Ukrainian brigade in the Pokrovsk direction that the Russian command had been transferring reinforcements for 2 weeks, forming assault groups of 15 to 20 people, but these reinforcements had poor training, and the Russians also increased the use of cars, motorcycles, and ATVs. This well explains why the RF could continue assaults, but was worse at turning them into stable territorial control. A small group without quality training can seep through, but it is difficult for them to dig in, organize a defense, call for support, evacuate the wounded, and survive Ukrainian FPV drones. In 2026, more reports appeared regarding the involvement of foreigners from poor countries, often through deception or semi-coercion. AP investigated cases of Bangladeshi citizens lured to civilian work in the RF, forced to sign Russian documents, given only 3 days of training, shooting, movement, first aid, and then sent closer to the front. Medusa also wrote that many foreign RF fighters had no military training, received from 10 days to 3 months of basic training, had communication problems due to the language barrier, and often performed the role of expendables to identify Ukrainian positions. This does not mean the entire RF army is foreigners, but it is a strong indicator. When the regular recruitment system is strained, the RF expands recruitment with people who are difficult to train and integrate qualitatively. In March 2026, a Russian mill blogger directly criticized the pressure on lower command levels, who submit exaggerated reports of successes, and called for improved and extended combat training. ISW linked this criticism to RF failures and Ukrainian counterattacks. This system has a direct combat consequence. If commanders lie upwards about occupied positions, higher command builds subsequent plans on a false picture. This leads to poorly prepared attacks, underestimation of Ukrainian defense, inflated expectations, and loss of people without real operational results.
An important nuance: it cannot be said that the entire RF has become less prepared. In certain areas, especially in drones, the RF is, on the contrary, professionalizing. FPRI wrote in April 2026 that Russia continued to experiment with the use of UAVs in 2025, copied Ukrainian innovations, and scaled them across military districts. The authors noted that the RF narrowed the gap with Ukraine in UAV application thanks to elite units like Rubicon and new concepts, although this did not provide a decisive breakthrough. Rubicon is a good example of an island of quality. It is not a typical infantry mass, but a specialized UAV center with its own school, technicians, analytics, feedback from developers, and approximately 1.5-month courses for recruits. Ukrainian sources also evaluated Rubicon as a professional and dangerous structure. Thus, the picture is the RF's mass infantry is degrading or remains low quality. Specialized drone/technical units, on the contrary, may be improving. But it is precisely the mass infantry that is needed to seize and hold territory. Has the quality of the RF Armed Forces command staff worsened? I would formulate it carefully. It is not necessarily that commanders have become worse as people, but the command system has become less effective under the conditions of the 2026 war. Reasons: 1. Loss of experienced officers and sergeants. Over 4 years of war, the experienced corps is knocked out, and replacements do not have the same combat experience. 2. Lack of a strong NCO culture like in NATO. The Russian army traditionally poorly delegates decisions to junior commanders. This is especially harmful in a drone war, where decisions must be made quickly and on the spot. United 24, citing a military analyst, described this problem as systemic. The RF does not have the kind of sergeant corps that gives lower levels autonomy. 3. Reporting culture is stronger than training culture. If one is punished for an unoccupied settlement, but not for a false report, commanders are incentivized to fabricate successes. 4. The pace of political orders is faster than the pace of training. Putin needs a continuous offensive, while quality training requires a pause. The Russian army in 2026 has not become completely incapable, but its mass infantry model has become less effective. In 2025, the RF could afford poorly trained soldiers because it had a sufficient flow of recruits and could apply pressure through numbers. In 2026, this flow is weakening, losses accumulating. Drones and strikes on logistics raise training requirements, and the Russian command cannot provide a longer training cycle without losing momentum. If we compare January to April 2025 and January to April 2026, the number of combat engagements is not falling. On the contrary, January to April 2025, approximately 17,278 engagements.
January to April 2026, approximately 20.4 to 20.9 thousand engagements. In other words, in 2026, the intensity was approximately 18 to 21% higher, taking the available range for February 2026. But the territorial result is worse. January to April 2025, about 825 square kilometers of newly occupied territory, according to DeepState. January to April 2026, about 672 square kilometers. Therefore, the RF conducted more assaults/engagements, but gained less territory. In 2025, the RF on average spent approximately 17,278 engagements in 825 square kilometers, equals approximately 21 engagements per square kilometer. In 2026, 20,500 engagements in 672 square kilometers. So, by this crude metric, the cost of 1 square kilometer for the RF increased by approximately 40 to 45%. The most telling example is April 2026. The number of engagements rose compared to March, 5,085 versus 5,985. DeepState also estimated that the number of assaults in April increased by 2.2%, but the area of newly occupied territory fell from 160 square kilometers to 141 square kilometers, in other words, by 11.9%. DeepState directly derived a ratio of about 36 assaults per square kilometer in April. This is a strong argument that the RF's problem is not the number of attempts, but the decrease in the effectiveness of each attempt. The RF did not reduce offensive pressure in March and April 2026. It maintained or even increased the number of assault actions, but these assaults became less effective. This could mean several things. 1. Assaults have become smaller. The number of engagements may be high, but if they are small groups of 15 people, motorcycles, ATVs, infiltrations without armor, then it does not equal a full-fledged ability to break through defenses. 2. Ukraine is better at disrupting the exploitation of success. A Russian group may enter a tree line or a gray zone, but then it is cut off by drones, artillery, mines, or counterattacks. 3. RF logistics is worse at maintaining the pace. If supply points, control points, drone workshops, and supply routes are hit in the rear, the first wave of the assault may go in, but consolidation and reinforcements do not arrive in time. 4. Infantry quality is lower. A poorly trained soldier can participate in an assault, but navigates worse, interacts with drones and artillery worse, digs in worse, and loses combat effectiveness faster. 5. More activity for the sake of activity. The RF command may maintain high attack numbers due to a political order to pressure along the entire front line, even if these attacks do not yield an operational result. An important question: can the RF simultaneously prepare reserves for the summer campaign? Yes, it can, but at the level of frontline statistics, we do not see a broad pause for accumulating reserves. If the RF was truly sharply saving forces for the summer, we would expect a drop in the number of engagements in March and April. Instead, we see March 2026, 5,085 engagements. April 2026, 5,085 engagements. In April, there were also almost 7,000 KABs, glide bombs, and in March, 7,987 KABs. Therefore, the RF continued to use the aviation component very intensely. Therefore, the more likely model is the RF did not stop the offensive to prepare for a summer campaign, but is trying to do both processes simultaneously. maintain high pressure on the front, and parallel accumulate reserves in certain directions. But this creates a problem. If the RF is spending people, equipment, KABs, and drones right now, then its summer reserve may be of lower quality or smaller than planned.
Let's consider how the tactics of the RF troops have changed, from mass meat waves to smaller infiltration. The RF increasingly uses small groups, infiltration, motorcycles, buggies, ATVs, and light transport. This allows maintaining a high number of attacks but reduces the ability for deep breakthrough and consolidation. The Russian tactics have become more dispersed, many small contacts, many infiltration attempts, much pressure in different directions. But such a model has a weakness. If Ukraine quickly detects groups with drones and hits logistics, these groups often remain isolated. Strengthening the role of cabs and drones. March 2026, 7,987 cabs. April, almost 7,000. This indicates that the RF compensates for lower infantry effectiveness with massed fire pressure. Simultaneously, Russia is increasing the production and use of strike drones against Ukrainian energy. Reuters, citing CIR, wrote that in winter 2025-2026, the RF sharply increased strikes on small substations, and from November 2025 to March 2026, according to Ukrainian data, launched over 1,000 missiles and 27,000 Shad-type drones. This creates double pressure, front plus rear infrastructure. But on the battlefield, this does not fully compensate for the loss of effectiveness of the ground offensive. Several centers of gravity of the RF forces can be identified, not just as strengths, but those power nodes thanks to which the RF is able to constantly pressure, maintain a high number of attacks, and compensate for the low quality of infantry. I would divide them into strategic, operational, and tactical. The main center of gravity of the RF on the front is not separately infantry or artillery. It is a system of attritional pressure consisting of 5 key elements. The human resource that the RF is ready to expend. Fire superiority, cabs, artillery, drones, missiles. Logistics and ammunition, including external supplies. Drone reconnaissance strike complex. The Kremlin's political will to wage a war of attrition regardless of losses. If Ukraine or its allies can systematically weaken 2 to 3 of these elements simultaneously, the dynamics may sharply change in Ukraine's favor. Center of gravity number 1, the RF's ability to expend people. This is the basic center of gravity. Even if the quality of infantry is low, its quantity allows the RF to constantly test Ukrainian defenses, keep many directions under pressure, force Ukraine to expend drones, artillery, ammunition, and reserves, create gray zones with small groups, search for weak spots in the defense. CSIS directly points out that Russia has an advantage due to a significantly larger pool of soldiers it can mobilize and estimates Russian losses in 2025 at approximately 415,000 people, almost 35,000 per month. But this is no longer a limitless resource. ISW noted in April 2026 that the RF has problems with contract recruitment and cannot fully compensate for frontline losses. Center of gravity number 2, cabs and frontline aviation. Cabs allow the RF to compensate for infantry weakness.
Before an assault, Russians can destroy positions, shelters, buildings, logistics, and defense nodes without aviation entering the close-range kill zone. That is why even poorly prepared infantry can advance after massed fire processing. Center of gravity number 3, artillery ammunition base. Russia still has the ability to wage a high-intensity war thanks to stockpiles, domestic production, and external supplies, especially shells, missiles, mortar ammunition, UAVs, and components. CSIS notes that the Russian defense industry produces significant volumes of tanks, ammunition, and drones with the help of China, Iran, the DPRK, and other partners. Center of gravity number 4, frontline logistics. A Russian offensive relies on the ability to daily supply ammunition, cabs, drones, fuel, people, engineering equipment, EW systems, spare parts, evacuation, and repair. Ukraine seems to have correctly identified this center of gravity. Reuters wrote that in April 2026, Ukraine conducted over 160 medium-range strikes, 120 to 150 kilometers, targeting over 65 logistics and ammunition sites, 33 control points or drone workshops, and 17 command posts. Center of gravity number 5, drone reconnaissance strike complex. In 2026, the war is increasingly becoming a struggle of systems. Who sees faster, transmits coordinates, makes decisions, and strikes? Russia has strengths in this complex: mass production of FPV and strike drones, Shahed campaigns in the rear, reconnaissance drones, EW, fiber optic drones, specialized drone units, and integration of drones with artillery and cabs. Center of gravity number 6, EW and the ability to complicate Ukrainian drone advantage. Russian EW is one of the factors not always visible in statistics, but very important. EW allows the RF to cover assault groups, reduce the accuracy of Ukrainian FPVs, complicate reconnaissance, and protect logistics. Center of gravity number 7, air defense and the security of the Russian operational rear. Russian air defense remains critical for protecting warehouses, headquarters, airfields, bridges, rail hubs, oil refining, and troop concentrations. Systematically weakening this shield opens access to other centers of gravity. Center of gravity number 9, strategic strike campaign against the Ukrainian rear. The RF pressures not only the front, it systematically hits energy, ports, logistics, cities, and military-industrial facilities in Ukraine. The goal is stretching Ukrainian air defense, economic exhaustion, and psychological pressure. Center of gravity number 9, strategic strike campaign against Ukraine's rear. Russia pressures not only the front, it systematically hits energy, ports, logistics, cities, and military-industrial facilities in Ukraine. The goal is stretching Ukrainian air defense, economic exhaustion, and psychological pressure. Center of gravity number 10, defense industrial base and external partners. Frontline activity is a consequence that its industry and partners continue to provide resources for the war, DRK, Iran, etc. Russian strength is not in each element being high quality. Its strength is that the system has many interchangeable sources of pressure. If infantry is weak, it compensates with cabs. If armor is scarce, it moves to small groups and motorcycles. If artillery is lacking, it increases drones. To reach a turning point, it is not enough to destroy one component. The greatest effect comes from the synchronous weakening of several centers of gravity. logistics plus air defense EW, cabs plus drone complex plus recruitment. Precisely such a combination can force the RF not just to lose effectiveness, as in March-April 2026, but to move towards a real reduction in the number of attacks and loss of initiative. Russia maintains pressure thanks to mass and fire. Ukraine can break the dynamics if it turns the Russian mass into isolated, poorly supplied groups without aviation, logistical, and drone covering. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Stay on the side of good. Glory to Ukraine.